the Agile brand.
Hey there, it's your pal, Bonnie Habian, and welcome to the Worth Knowing podcast. If you like a real-life story that features grit, grace, and a whole lot of gumption, then you're in the right place. Get ready to hear from some courageous women who talk about how pivotal, teachable, aha moments have reshaped their confidence and delivered opportunities they never imagined. It didn't happen by chance, of course. They figured out new, sometimes uncomfortable ways to put themselves out there in a way that shouts, they get it. You'll hear intimate stories with actionable takeaways and some very secret sauce. Because everyone has an important story worth knowing. And you know what? The world needs it, and you deserve it. Hi there. Today with me, I have Kara Goldin, and I am so excited because she is a powerhouse entrepreneur who actually started on this health journey, and it turned into something called Hint. Now, listen, I am a huge Hint fanatic, particularly peach. And I have to talk to her because I can't find that peach in my local grocery store, so I order it online. But anyhow, it's a fabulous story, and it's much more of a story than just water and clean, natural, healthy, unsweetened water. It's a story about so much more about her life and her purpose and what she's trying to bring to the world. Now, as we know, this drink Hint is in stores and across the nation, in Silicon Valley, a lot of tech companies. And the best way I can probably describe, at least my interaction with Kara so far, is that she is tenacious, she is bright, she is beautiful, she is really, really driven. And today, she's my guest on Worth Knowing. So I have a ton of questions for her. But first of all, thank you, Kara, and it is great to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very, very excited to meet you and join you on the program.
Well, I'm going to dive in because I think one of the things that I have gleaned from you is this common saying that you are an accidental entrepreneur. And I really want to kind of delve down that a little bit. Maybe you can tell me, tell my friends here, and that's what I call them my pals, a little bit about your journey. And I know you went to University of Arizona, your journey, maybe a little bit about your childhood, and then what led up to this aha, you know what, I need to get healthy moment. I mean, I did read that you were drinking like 10 to 12 Diet Cokes a day, and then you had this kind of epiphany. So let's get to know Kara a little bit before we delve into this amazing product that you have created, invented, nurtured, and grown.
Yeah, well, I do call myself an accidental entrepreneur because unlike many people, I did not ever think or dream or major in entrepreneurship. I really thought about more than anything that if I was going to work and do something, I wanted to do something that I was excited about, right?
Sure.
But I wasn't really focused on what was the name of that, right? Which I think is a really, really important point because I think sometimes people get so stuck on, whether it's what your major is or how much money you're going to make. I'm a huge believer that if you are going to do something that you're really passionate about, that you're excited to get up every day, you're not going to count your hours. You're not going to think that you're so poor. You're not going to regret if you're doing something that you truly, truly love doing every single day. And so somewhere I got that gift of, that North Star of really saying, this is what I'm going to go out and do. But I didn't really have it all figured out. So when I knew I enjoyed writing a lot. And my father actually was also an entrepreneur, but never called himself an entrepreneur. He had developed a product called Healthy Choice for a large company.
I ate that a lot when I was younger. I remember, probably just out of college, I'd grab the Healthy Choice little frozen, like the frozen dinners and the frozen food products, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
And so he had developed it actually under a different name at Armour Food Company. And then they got acquired by ConAgra. And so he went from Armour Food Company over to ConAgra and they called it Healthy Choice. But so I had watched him for years, always incubating and developing and storytelling initially on the back of the Healthy Choice packaging as well about things like, and St. Simon's Island, not far from where you are,
Yes.
where they would catch the shrimp that would go into the all of the different meals that contain shrimp. And he would tell stories about the fishermen and how they cared so much about it and what time they went out, and allowed consumers to kind of go on this journey with them. And so, to me as a kid growing up with that, um, honestly, at times it was annoying because I would hear these stories
Yes,
all the time.
I've
They
heard
would
this a
run
million times.
a million times. But and my dad was very much a storyteller and a journalist, and so a lot of that, I think, it came, natural for him, but it sort of, I guess, came over to me as well.
Well, yeah, and I know you were kind of in the Silicon Valley scenario. You were an AOL exec. I know you did some stints at Time, CNN. I believe you started a family, came back to AOL, if I'm not mistaken. Feel free to correct me. But at some point, you had this kind of epiphany of, wait a minute, I think I'm gonna try something a little different. And it started really as just throwing some fruit right in your kitchen into some water.
Yeah, definitely. And and you mentioned some of the companies that I worked for. So as I was, leaving Arizona, that's when I, started my career in journalism, thinking that it's something that I want to do,
Yep.
that I'm really passionate about, and ended up starting my career with actually the biggest company I've ever been with, at the time, was Time Warner, not really so much a startup. Ended up getting recruited out of there to go to a little bit later stage startup called CNN.
Oh gosh.
And this was in, the early 90s. And it was probably the first place where I saw a founder. Didn't really know that term either, but Ted Turner was
Yep.
running around the office
With
here and
Jane.
there, with Jane, exactly. And then I met my husband while I was living, my soon to be husband, while I was living in New York, and we decided to move out to the Bay Area, primarily because of him. He wanted to do technology law, and nothing was really going on in New York at the time. And so we came out here. And one thing that my dad always instilled in me was that if you don't really know what to do when you're looking for a career, is find the brands, find the things that you gravitate towards, that you personally love.
That's that's
And
that's great advice. That really is. I mean, I'm going to put that away somewhere because that'll get you closer to something, right?
it'll get you closer to something. And that's what he always believed. And so for me, San Francisco, I didn't know any people. I didn't really have connections. I had been working in New York City in these big media companies. And so when I moved out to San Francisco, everything was kind of called satellite, right? It wasn't as cool. It didn't have the cachet as working in New York media. And so I gravitated towards brands that I had really admired. And one of them was Apple. And I had been following, I had a Mac when I was in college, one of the early iMacs. And pretty quickly, I, of course, I'd been following Steve Jobs as an entrepreneur too, and thought that what he was doing was very interesting. But what I quickly realized is I wanted to live in San Francisco, and Apple was based in Cupertino, which was about 100 miles away. And so it sounds close, all in the Bay Area, but it's actually quite far. So I thought, oh, that's not really going to work. But I had found a little startup that spun out of Apple, that was actually incubated inside of Apple. And it was a Steve Jobs idea that was doing CD-ROM shopping. And I thought, I like to shop. It was started inside of Apple, kind of close. It'll get me.
It'll get you closer.
It's a step, right?
Sure.
Which I think is sort of another, key piece that kind of goes along with the other points that I was mentioning too, is that if you don't really know where you're going, just don't stay complacent. Keep moving and try and figure out what you can do. And I think that that's like such a key point to sort of a clear map is that if you rather than stop, that doesn't mean that that you can't take a break either. That just means that you need to start searching and try and figure things out. And so that was my point in finding this company. And I cold called a person that was working there, happened to pick up the phone, happened to have coffee, and all of a sudden I'm working for a little startup in Silicon Valley that was doing CD-ROM shopping. So that was sort of my exit from journalism, not because I hated journalism or I hated storytelling, but because to me it was just a very different environment experience than what I was feeling in New York City.
So, but okay, so this is, I mean, there's so many mantras that I totally align with. I'm thinking, when you're kind of in this startup scenario and then, at some point you just by chance, accidentally start kind of down the water path. At least from my understanding, and I've read your book, Undaunted, and I've listened to it actually twice now because it's so valuable for me personally. But at what point do you say, okay, now this is my passion? Because to me, it was a tremendous amount of work, strategic risk, obstacles, probably extremely challenging. So I'm wondering, when you start going down that path, is it because it is so hard that it was driving you? What pulled you away from maybe going forward with something with Apple?
Yeah, so I think well, first of all, distance, right?
Yeah,
For
yeah,
me, it was just
very
it
true.
was
Different time in
yeah,
your life. Yeah.
and that was a roadblock. I mean, I didn't have kids yet, but it was still I wasn't going to move down to I wasn't going to move 100 miles
No,
away, and I thought it was unrealistic for me to be driving that every single day. Remember, we weren't doing telecommuting back then.
correct.
Right. And so it's a totally different time. And so this role was actually in San Mateo, which was, I don't know, 20 miles away from San Francisco. So it was a little distance, but it was still doable. So that was number one. And I thought, what's the worst that can happen? Once I got this job offer to actually run the partnerships. So it was similar in some ways to what I was doing at CNN, which was sales at CNN. And I was meeting with advertisers. And I think that the most interesting thing and where I sort of pieced it together in my head too was that with CNN, again, I'm totally taking you on a journey back to advertising days of the 90s, but cable didn't have measurement, right, in
No,
those early days. And
no,
so we didn't have Nielsen. We didn't have anything. I mean, it was
no.
basically we were meeting with agencies and saying, Saddam Hussein is watching CNN to see whether or not their country is being bombed. I mean, it was just, that was it. And so we were storytelling around that and being successful around that. And I think that I thought, wow, if I can do that and do it around shopping, which I'm going to be meeting with The Gap and J. Crew and all of these incredible brands. I thought, I don't know if I can do it or not, but what's the worst that can happen?
So I'm seeing a couple of things. You put yourself out there early. You went for some very large brands. You learned from some of the best. So then, in some respects, this may not have been so scary. But I love for folks to understand. And most people they consume the hint. They love the hint. This is fabulous. They have no idea kind of what went into getting this on a shelf. So take me back to those earlier days when you say, okay, I'm stopping the diet soda thing. I'm going to start making something that's delicious. I believe somebody drank it and commented on it. And then you say, well, maybe I can deliver this and bring this to stores and to the world to help them. Big thought here to there. And I don't understand what your hubby said. He sounds like a good guy.
Well, like you were saying, I mean, there were a few years in between there where I was drinking a ton of Diet Coke, and it actually started when I was in high school. I started drinking Diet Coke and
Yeah.
just kept drinking it, not thinking that there was anything wrong with it. And as time went on, actually, our startup that I was just talking about got acquired by America Online. I was there building out the shopping group there, and then decided that I didn't want to be on a plane all the time, which is what I was essentially doing, running this marketplace. And so when I decided that I was going to take a break and leave AOL, that's when I didn't know how long I was going to take a break for, but I thought there's plenty of jobs now. Tech was definitely was booming and e-commerce was going. And so I thought I'm going to take a break, and had a bunch of kids. I had 3 kids at the time,
Bless your heart.
but I thought it was definitely time where I was not going to be just staying at home. But I didn't know exactly what I was going to do. I continued to interview for jobs, but I was not ready to jump in. And I think more than anything, I wasn't super interested. Where I got really interested, or what I got really interested in, was what I was putting in my kids' bodies initially. And so I thought that was an area that I was totally educated. I was forced to be educated by, because I had been focusing on me
Yeah.
for so many
Big
years,
difference when that
right?
happens. When your kids come, everything changes.
Yeah, you're like, wait, why is it that after, breastfeeding and bottle feeding, we're giving kids apple juice? Like, I mean, I would hear these things and I'd process it, and I wasn't even necessarily arguing about it, but I was just like, wait, why is that? And as my husband would say, I think you need to go back to work. You're overthinking things, right? And so then as I was going through that process, that's when I thought, well, I'm kind of a hypocrite. I'm sitting here drinking all of these things with so many chemicals in it, so much not sweeteners like sugar, but diet sweeteners, that I really started to look at our entire household's issue around not just what we were putting in our body, drinking and eating, but also like, what had I been doing? And how healthy was I really? I had gained a bunch of weight over the course of having kids, like, everyone does, but I couldn't lose the weight. And I didn't really understand the connection between, what these diet sweeteners were doing to my system and why it was causing me not to be able to lose the weight. So again, my curiosity, which is a whole other,
Another
thing that I
mantra.
think, yeah, mantra that I was, curious about. And I think, like the other examples that I gave you, I think I've always been super interested in the puzzle, right? Like that if I see something that I'm super curious about, that I'm not afraid to not have a map in front of me. I don't, with CNN, for example, somebody told me, you don't have any numbers to actually sell this product off of. I think I had never been in sales for before. So I didn't know any better,
Right.
which I think also led me to be able to go into tech not knowing any better, and then into the beverage industry not knowing any better. As I say to people, today, it's like, it's not the super experienced people that are going to ultimately crush you, right? It's the people that are so naive and so curious and so resilient that they just are going to wake up every single day and try and do something.
And that's you. And so I want to go back to a little bit of a Coke story again, if you're interested or okay with
Yeah.
sharing it, because one of the things, again, learning how you say seek out, people that can help you, even if they give you constructive criticism, that is fine. You have to know the difference between constructive criticism and really just like naysayers, which is very important. But you are now, going more along with the concept of how you're going to bottle this water and distribute it and get it on shelves, and you go and seek out advice from a Coke exec. And to me, after walking out of that meeting, I would have just been somewhat defeated. But this is one of your mantras, I think, that really came into play. Can you share a little bit about that conversation and how that kind of maybe lit a fire under you?
Yeah, well, I was introduced. I was just about to give up on
You were.
the yeah, I
You
was
did come
I
to a point.
was
Okay.
so frustrated by all of the roadblocks that I was hitting. I think everyone can probably imagine a time when, you finally started questioning, should I really do this? And I was getting offers, great offers from companies in Silicon Valley that were saying,
Come
why
back
don't
to
you
work.
come do this?
Yeah.
And also things that I knew how to do, right? That I had proven myself. And so I could jump into that and, pick up where I left
You
off.
could have easily done that.
Right. But for me, I saw this problem out there that no one was focusing on. And I kept thinking that if I focused on it enough, then maybe I could go develop something that could help a lot of people. Where I hit a roadblock was what I was trying to do was actually develop something that had never been done. So a product that was an unsweetened flavored water that didn't have preservatives in it. And as I was telling people about it, because again, I would be in stores and I would run into people who worked for, the Cokes and the Pepsis of the world. They were super nice. I knew people that had worked at some of those companies before. And I happened to run into a friend who said, I just met this guy, very senior from Coca-Cola on the plane. And I was telling him about you. And he said, why don't you give her my email?
Which is
And
amazing.
have her reach out. And I was like, really? And so part of me was thinking, why would I talk to a competitor? But then I thought, I'm going to learn a lot more from him.
Right.
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 And so why not? And maybe he'll even take the company. Maybe he'll buy it just like they had bought other brands over the years. So that was my goal. When I got on the phone with him, I thought, he's going to give me a lot of advice about my product.
Right.
What I didn't expect was that he was actually going to tell me why I was wrong. And I think that you get on the phone with people all the time, right? Where, you don't know, you can hope that a conversation is going to go run one way. You can imagine, but you always, if you listen closely, you may end up going down a lane that you don't even know you're going to go down, right? And so that was that day. And when I realized very, very quickly was that he was almost defensive about when he saw what I was doing, he was poo-pooing it like, oh, this is never going to happen. People don't like sweet.
Because people wouldn't like it. It wasn't that it was
Right.
impossible to do. It was just that maybe there's not an appetite or a market for it.
Right. Well, sorry, I said that wrong. So people love sweet. And what I was doing was not where the consumer is. And
Got
I
it.
said, well, I totally disagree because I am your consumer. I used to drink 10 to 12 of these every single day. And he said, you're an anomaly. Like people don't really want to drink water. And I said, I don't know. And he said, where do you live? And I said, San Francisco. He's like, oh, people in San Francisco are they're San Francisco. That's just and so
Okay.
everything that I was saying for the
Right.
first 5 minutes. And then finally, he said something that kind of stopped me in my tracks, which I'm very grateful for. He
Mhm.
said, sweetie, Americans love sweet. I was like, wait, what? Did he just call me sweetie? So
Oh gosh, that's a whole nother conversation, right? But that
Totally.
caught your ear probably more than the sweet sugar.
Well, and sometimes it's really nice not to have a visual in front of you because my dad said it's a good thing that you weren't sitting in his office and because
Would have, yeah.
right? And I said, yeah, I was just silent for a minute. And then I thought, oh, wait, he's actually telling me a lot about what his strategy is, right? And so I started to listen and I thought, okay, and I kept listening for the next 45 minutes and he went on and and I think at the end of the call, I think he thought he had convinced me that my idea, hint, was terrible and it wasn't going to go anywhere. And I thanked him for his time and, hung up the phone. And I thought, okay, I could be upset about that. I could, be threatened. I could be annoyed, whatever. I could quit. I could, he's clearly not going to buy my idea today. Like I thought, he's not going to help me co-pack, the bottles or do anything that I thought maybe was a possibility. And instead, I thought, or option A is I put the gas on and I get going and I build this out and I prove it. And I'm not necessarily going to prove it to him,
Right.
but I'm going to prove the concept out because you know what? Maybe he's right. But the fact that he feels so strongly
about it. Maybe you
about
wanted to get
this
that decision quicker. The proof of concept. Is there something
proof
there?
of concept.
Yeah.
Right. And so there's always a little bit of truth.
That's a good thing.
And as he was talking about this, but I also thought he has a lot more money than I do.
Yeah.
And so I better he might have a huge cruise ship, but it's going to take him a while to turn the cruise ship around, right? And so I thought, okay, I'm going to throw the gas on and hopefully I'm right. And so that's what I did.
And this brings me to what I found, I think the biggest theme that I hear from you. When you come across an obstacle or something that could really derail you, as opposed to digging down and kind of saying, oh, well, maybe dig in and find a little bit of a solution. And case in point, I believe one of the biggest barriers to getting this into the market was shelf life. That was a huge thing for your, during the time when you're trying to figure out how can you get this on a shelf where it has no preservatives, it's all natural, and how long does it last? Right? People don't want it a week, even a month. That was almost a game kind of breaker for you, correct?
Totally.
But as opposed to you saying, hands up, done, you figured it out. And I think that is so important for any entrepreneur, any professional, any mom, anybody in any capacity to really kind of take that mentality. But did that almost break you? Or at what point did you say, oh my gosh, we've got it figured out?
It's interesting. I think when you look back, if you're used to building puzzles, right? And you're used to doing things where you pick up on people's responses to things where, if people are saying, no, you can't do it. I was the last of 5 kids. So my parents were so used to saying no. And I was like, why? And if they didn't come up with a reason, I just kept going, right?
Thank goodness.
Until there was some logical reason.
Yeah, because I said so, it wasn't going to fly.
No, it wasn't going to fly. And so that continued as I went on in life, like as I started continuing to grow things. And again, like working in tech, I think and also working, in a startup environment already, like the best startups are not the startups that are mimicking something that's already been done. So there's always a little bit and sometimes a lot that is unknown. And you have to keep figuring it out along the way and testing things and being good, at doing that. So when I was hearing in the beverage industry that we couldn't produce a shelf-stable product without preservatives, I would say, why?
Why?
I'm not.
That's a science
and
question,
no one,
right? That's a science question.
And no one had the answer. And so I kept asking people in different industries, trying to figure out, like, why do you think? And they're like, I have no idea. I mean, if X does this, then why can't, why do that? Anyway, it was this constant curiosity, I guess, in me. And what I've figured out, though, along the way, going back to, what I said when I was a kid, is that if you don't actually have a logical answer, then maybe there is no answer. Right? Maybe the answer is that somebody just doesn't want to do it, which was our case too. Or
somebody just missed it. They just missed it. So they just say, I don't know.
And they don't need to do it. I mean, that was probably the hardest thing, is that when you walk into an industry and you don't have the credentials, right? Like I hadn't I had been a vice president inside of a tech company, but everybody kept asking me, did you like, should I bank on you because, you haven't worked at Coke or Pepsi or Procter and Gamble
Yeah.
or whatever this, again, going back to the brands that in their mind was what I should work for. But otherwise, they were busy enough. So they were like, who is this lady? Oh, and by the way, you have 4 young kids that I
Yeah.
like, maybe you should just like go,
Right. And
go do
that
your thing.
that goes back to the whole don't doubt, right? Push, be curious, all of those various things. And I mean, I love the fact that, I love Whole Foods. We don't have one near my house anymore. And I know they were kind of, and I remember always seeing hint in there. But I love the fact that you have kind of pushed through all of those various hurdles. And there were a ton of them. I mean, and again, just listening to anything from the type of bottle to how you were going to get it processed to changing the color, the brand, which I love that, instead of it making it transparent to have a color. So many things along the way that my mind was swirling. But I will tell you, and I know this one date, and I need to put this out there because it's the day before my daughter's birthday, March 9th, 2010. To me, when I heard about that date, it gave me chills for many reasons for you because it's a wonderful story. But I want my listeners to understand you go through a lot of trials and tribulations. That was a good day, right?
Yeah, I mean, real quickly, I'll try and summarize it down. But basically, we were getting into Starbucks.
Ah,
Finally, we had been trying to get into Starbucks. We thought we were going to do a test with Starbucks, and then they called us back after a few different phone calls and said, "Listen, we made a decision not to do a test with you and actually have you go chain wide with all of our stores."
and how many were they at the time? What was that?
It's like 6,000.
It's a lot of
Yeah.
stores. That's a lot
Yeah,
of
it was a
water.
lot of stores. Yeah. And also military bases. And, there was a lot there too that was, very exciting. So we were very, very excited to do this, but a little nervous because we were like, how is it going to work? I hope it works. I mean, do people want to buy something besides coffee in Starbucks? Like, I mean, there were a lot of things going on, but we thought, what's the worst that can happen? And then my husband, actually, who was our chief operating officer, said, when do you need the spy? And they said March 9th. And that's his birthday. And so he was like, we're in. This is going to be my birthday gift, like to myself. Hopefully it's going to be a great one. So it was a funny story, but yeah, there's so many stories in that book. And more than anything, somebody asked me a few years ago, I wrote the book a few years ago, and somebody said, why do you want to write a book? And I said, I feel like stories are the things that really help give people strength to know that when things are hard or in their own life, right? You don't have to be a beverage executive or an entrepreneur. You have to know that, it's not just me that is challenged, right? And that you can get through really hard things. You can slow down. You can build a business with 4 kids. You can do things when everybody's saying no to you, or you don't have to, too. And so I think like that's a thing that's an overall theme when you talked about lessons that I think along the way that are constantly going through my head that I want people to take away. And I think you see more of them and hear more about them in the book.
You do. I mean, some of your mantras, be curious. What are some of your favorites? Like that you would, if there are 2 or 3 mantras that you live by daily, keep learning, doubt. Really, really maybe try and push that out and take criticism and make sure it's constructive. I think those mantras are so important for any entrepreneur. But I do want to ask you one thing. What you're saying, and it seems to me you had a good unit, which means you probably had a good tribe around you. Maybe I'm wrong. Is it important when you're going through something like this, when you may have people who are playing pickleball, someone else who is, has a regular job, someone that's going on vacations, but you are focused on having to get, I don't know, several million cases of water together for a possible launch into Starbucks? How important is to have like-minded folks around you? Do you find that that's important to have that tribe, or was it more individual with you and Theo?
Well, I think Theo, anyone who knows him, my husband, would say this too. We're very different people. We're very compatible, going on 30 years of marriage, but
Congratulations.
very, very different people. Thank you. But I think that I've always surrounded myself with people, including friends of mine, where it makes life more interesting to have people around who challenge you, who help you raise the bar,
Yeah, I
who
agree.
are teammates, but are, they'll, encourage you to do things that you wouldn't normally do, right?
Yeah.
Travel to places or do things that, visit new restaurants or do any of those things. I've also got a group of people that are very supportive that will tell you what you want to hear. My family, I always tell people that family is the best and the worst because they don't ever want you to take risk, right? Most family doesn't because they don't want to see you hurt, right? And so they're always going to say, yeah, maybe you should quit. Maybe you shouldn't do that. Why would you want to go climb like the Grand Canyon? I mean, what was it? Why would you do that? Why wouldn't you sit on a beach? Why would
And you've had people, I'm sure, say that to you about when you're
Totally.
killing yourself developing this
Totally.
product. Why are you doing that? You don't need to do that, right?
Right. And so what I did do was find, it, I always think I talk to people a lot about co-founders. And I think that while we didn't necessarily, Theo was joining me on this venture, it was my idea, but he was joining me on this venture. I mean, we were definitely the co-founders of the company. I think it's important to have somebody there with you because I see a lot of startups in particular that if it's just you doing the heavy lifting and hearing no every single day,
Yeah, it's
it's
hard.
really, really emotionally, it's a very, very hard thing. And you can build a team underneath you, but the problem is that the buck stops with you.
Yeah.
And I think that people, they want their paycheck. They want, all these things because they're supporting your idea, but it's not their idea. They'll never work as hard as you do. When you have a co-founder who's able to take on a certain area and maybe help you think about things, I think it's just it just makes it
Yeah.
a better venture. So
All right. Well, I want to end on this because we've talked about a lot during these last several moments, and I think it's important for anyone who's going after any sort of dream to really kind of listen and learn from others. So, if you could give three sorts of pieces of advice for anyone who has a North Star that seems daunting, what are three pieces of advice or mantras you would kind of lend to them to say, hey, hang on to these, they help me?
yeah, I think pay attention to things that you're really interested in, but don't be afraid to venture out and change those things that you're interested in. Taking on new things is a great example. Always be raising your own bar because I think that's an important thing. That just because you're, following your North Star and hitting your goals,
Yeah.
that doesn't mean once you're hitting those goals and coming closer, you have to pay attention to how you're going to continue to raise those bars. And especially when you're leading a company, it's up to you to raise those things and, raise those bars and make sure, because that just leads to kind of the last point, which is just continuing to keep yourself challenged along the way. And I think that is something that, is not just in business, but also in life, that if you're not challenging yourself every single day to do something and be a little bit nervous, then I don't think that's living.
Yeah.
And I think you should always be looking to do that.
Well, I want to thank you. Thank you again, Kara Goldin, who is the founder of Hint, an amazing woman. If you want to learn more about Kara, make sure you go to the show notes. We'll have all of our information there. And feel free to share this podcast and make sure to download the Worth Knowing newsletter and subscribe to that so you can get everyone delivered directly to your inbox. Now, until next time, I want you to keep chasing those aha moments, the ones that deliver results and motivate and teach the world.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Worth Knowing. If you'd like to learn more about our guest story or connect with them, you'll find their details in the show notes. Remember, the path to worth knowing is paved with courage and insight. Stay inspired, keep striving, and continue to make a difference. Then, you must make sure to share it with others. Until next time, keep chasing those aha moments, my friends. You know, the ones that deliver results and motivate and teach the world. Worth Knowing is produced by Missing Link, a Latina-owned, strategy-driven, creatively fueled production co-op. From ideation to creation, they craft human connections through intelligent, engaging, and informative content. The Agile Brand.